Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my review of Alien Isolations. It's 10 years on. In fact, I've been dabbling in a little bit of a side project going back to games from 2014. It was kind of a pretty pivotal time for me and PC gaming. I started to really get into it around then. I'd always been a bit of everything, but I think I really hung up the console probably in 2014. And so I have very fond memories of Alien Isolation. I'm a huge Alien fan. I just went and watched Aliens and Alien back to back in a cinema screening for Alien Day on the 26th. And if you are watching this when the review goes up, it's on very deep sale and worth getting up. Let's just get that out of the way. This game has aged like fine wine and it is still phenomenal and best in class. And if you're an Alien fan, even if you weren't a gamer, or even necessarily like, I don't know, a horror game player, like even if all of this is out of your wheelhouse, but you're an Alien fan, this is kind of a must play. So also worth mentioning, when I do reviews on the channel, I generally have an objective standard I hold to, which is for every $5 Australian that I give a game, I kind of expect it gives me an hour of solid gameplay fun. It's an objective standard, it's to standardize everything. I wasn't really sure how that would work going into a game that's 10 years old. You know, the price of games changes, but this is still asking $60 Australian, which I guess you could say is steep. This was AAA when it came out, so that's more of a AA price now, and that would be 12 hours gameplay. And wouldn't you know it, I beat this game almost 12 hours on the dot. So I guess I held to that standard, and it was worth every second. I played it on hard, and I'm pretty sure I kind of went through it at a clip. I wasn't trying to rush the game, but, you know, we'll take a bit of time to talk about it. Given that I played this originally when it released, and while enough time had passed that I wasn't overly familiar with everything, I was still familiar with how the game works and how it plays, so I could kind of move through it, I would say, faster. It was still terrifying and heart in your mouth and all that sort of stuff, and on hard the game really keeps you honest. But I guess I didn't fall into some of the pitfalls with, you know, being too paralyzed by fear and sitting still and that. And if you have a look at how long to beat, they reckon it would take you 18 hours to beat this, and that makes sense on a first go through. I think a lot of trial and error and dying and figuring out how the game works would make it take longer. So yeah, I think it's worth your time, worth your money, and especially worth mentioning that if you went back, like me, maybe you beat it at launch and you wanted to go back to it and play it on hard, it's really fun and rewarding and challenging. And I'm not the sweatiest gamer and I scare easily, just as, even though I do enjoy horror. So what I'm saying is, you know, if you're apprehensive to go back and play this again on hard difficulty, maybe don't be. I loved every second of it. In fact, it's probably worth pointing out, one of the sort of negatives over the years that have come up and kind of sat in the back of my mind, right? If I had to poke holes in something that I'm a mad fan of, it would be that the pacing, the game felt a bit overlong. It outstayed its welcome. That stuck with me over the years, and that seems to be a bit of a consensus. Funnily enough, coming back to it now and playing through it again through the lens of kind of knowing what I'm doing, it felt almost perfect. The pacing issue was either blown out, or at least under modern sort of standards, it's not nearly as bad. The end does get a little bit ridiculous, and I know there's a bit of a statute of limitations, it's 10 years, but I'm still not going to spoil it, because there are some fucking banger twists in this game that if you somehow don't have it spoiled for you or know that are coming, I do not want to be the one to do that. It is such a brilliant game. So this isn't a spoiler discussion or anything like that. I'm going to protect the sanctity of the game, but I would highly recommend it. Check it out. If you managed to survive 10 years without it getting wrecked for you, play it. Play it this week. But yeah, so the difficulty on hard especially, but even it would be the same for normal. It just gets lumped on, and the last hour gets a little bit a little contrived, a little Lord of the Rings third movie fade to black 5 endings in a row. That would be probably the one major negative. Or actually, while I am sort of poking holes in it, because we're going to praise it for the rest of the video, there were actually quite a few bugs which sort of boggled my mind. Some of them made sense, as in it seems to have some sort of frame rate issues. I was getting some slowdown strange stuff. Occasionally, sort of your movement would speed up. If you tabbed out and tabbed back in, it had an issue with that. And to me, that just makes sense as something that was probably a console port for 30 frames 10 years ago, and then putting it on modern hardware and potentially having an uncapped frame rate. It had a few hiccups with that, but it was nothing super huge. But there were some bugs with some animations occasionally. A big chunk of the end of the game, I was on fire the whole time. Every time I pulled my arms up, they're just flaming Ripley. So there were a couple of things that happened, but nothing terribly game-breaking, not enough to wreck it. But interesting to point it out, because I think it had some bugs at launch, and that might have hurt it a little bit at the time. And it's just interesting that its legacy is that it still has a few bumps. Anyway, yes, in case I didn't make it clear, worth your time, worth your money. It's a drop everything, go play it, and it really makes me look at how I want to play games. This past couple of days, I haven't uploaded for a couple of days. I've sort of stepped back from the channel a little bit. That's not necessarily going to be the go, but it has been something refreshing about really just mainlining a game and having it consume you, and the fact that it's a 10-year-old classic is just wild. And so I might be implementing something more along those lines for the channel / the way that I play games going forward. I might alternate between something new, something old, and potentially get the community involved, because I know price points and games are so expensive now. But if I was potentially going through and reviewing like once a week something from 2014 that was at an affordable entry point, like this is, like I said, deep discount at the moment, maybe that's something people could get around with, especially if they're a bit jaded with the state of modern games. Anyway, I don't want to get off track too much, but drop a message if you find something like that interesting, and join the Discord to stay updated. I haven't really gone into what this game is mechanically, and strangely, it sits between what I would say is the two. I'm using my hands. I like to use my hands. I'm sitting between the two main survival horror spaces, right? And one of them I really don't like, which I would just call pure horror for the sake of horror. Less game, more horror, more the developer's intent is to scare the shit out of you than give you an actual game that happens to be in a horror setting. And then the other side is survival horror, which I would argue the greatest survival horror games aren't strictly that scary. It's more like having a period piece or whatever. Like, it's more that it's set in a horror setting. Resident Evil, of course, being the poster child for that. Yes, it's zombies and it's horror and people getting bitten and dying and all that sort of, right? And it gets tense and suspenseful at times, but generally speaking, the horror, suspense, heart in your mouth aspect that comes from a game like that is more about having 11 problems and 10 bullets, right? It's about managing your inventory. It's about Metroidvania mechanics implemented as well. So that's what makes a great survival horror. It just happens to be in a horror setting, but it doesn't really scare you, not enough to stop you from moving forward. Whereas you got on the other side of the aisle, and I should go back because I bash them and it's been a long time, but things like Outlast, right? Where it is really, you're a depowered character. Amnesia's another one as well, which was a great success, but maybe you feel the same way about it as me. It's just terrifying, and part of that terror is taking the actual survival horror components out of it. You don't really have weapons or inventory or anything like that. It's kind of just cat and mouse, this sort of hiding, not passive, but the loop is very much more about hiding than about all the, what I think are the intricate nuances of survival horror, of inventory management, map knowledge, ammo counts and weapons, and juggling all of that stuff. Anyway, so this sits very uniquely in between the two. It has elements of both. And there is one game that I can think of off the top of my head that does it very close and I loved, which was Amnesia: The Bunker, which I think I did a review of. I played it through, I consumed it, but that, I wouldn't be surprised if people would call it almost homage or spiritual successor to Alien Isolation, because it very much wears its inspiration on its sleeve, and it's the same sort of thing. You do have cat and mouse, but you also have a loop that goes beyond that. So yeah, there you go. Maybe there's a takeaway. Maybe you skipped on that because it's an Amnesia game. I only played it because I got given a key from a dev, because I'm a bit down on the Amnesia games, because I don't really, buckle in on a Friday night to have my pants scared off of me. But yeah, Amnesia the Bunker, such a brilliant game, I think, last year. So yeah, very much you're versing multiple antagonistic components as you work your way through a story. I don't want to get into too much spoilers, but you're playing Amanda Ripley as a sort of in-between spin-off of Alien and Aliens, while Ripley mum is floating around in a bloody life pod having escaped the first movie. You're playing as the daughter growing up, and for those on across it, and you should be across it because Alien's brilliant. There's a time jump between Alien 1 and 2 of like 50-something years while she's in stasis, and the real tragedy is that she never makes it home for Amanda's bloody 11th birthday. In fact, she's died of old age by the time she wakes up. I'm saying she a lot. By the time Mum wakes up in the second movie. So this is more daughter going out there and kind of taking company jobs as a technician. So she hasn't followed strictly in Mum's footsteps, but she's taking billets and jobs in vicinity of where Mum went missing. And that's where it kicks off. The Nostromo flight recorder, the Nostromo's the ship from the first movie, that's been picked up and brought into this station called Sevastopol Station. And the company taps her on the shoulder and says, "Hey, Amanda, we know what's going on. We're going out there to get the flight recorder. Do you want to be part of this as well?" Bit of closure. So it's got really good impetus, and it's got a great way of tying in as a spin-off without really fucking with canon, which is always the danger that you work, right? I really don't like bloody fanfic crap or extended universe stuff, but this manages to thread the needle kind of expertly. And so off you go. But yes, back to the sort of the loop, the antagonistic component. You're essentially fighting the alien. There is an alien moving around under a highly touted advanced AI at the time. So a lot of the game is, and this is right on the edge when procedural was starting to become a sexy topic, your No Man's Skies and all that sort of stuff. So it's this kind of emergent gameplay that's less scripted and more the alien has behaviors that are pseudo-predictable that you can work with. And that's the point. Like I said, emergent gameplay would be the best way to put it. Yes, you're moving through the station, and yes, it's fairly linear. Like, there is back and forth, but don't trick yourself. It's back and forth under the auspices of a linear handhold. So you're not necessarily exploring a mansion a la Resident Evil. I would not compare it to those Metroidvania, get the club key, that sort of stuff. You do move back and forth through station areas, and it does get a little bit samey because it's very much built on the idea of an existing station, which has like four-way symmetry over 4 towers. So as beautiful as the 70s clean futurism is, it's very difficult not to sort of get confused and not even really strictly get super attached to some of the areas. Some of the more specific areas like medical and that, they will have their own flair, but there's a lot of transit stations and moving between levels, like levels moving between levels. All right, I've finished at medical, now I'm going over to comms. You're moving back through this main transit area, which looks the same as the other 4 areas. So as it is a bit of a catch-22, as beautiful as these environs are, and the environmental design is just 10 out of 10, the nature of the beast, it gets a little bit like the bloody library level from the Halo, which I use as a great example of a level that really gives people the shits because of its repetitive look. So yes, so within this kind of linear but well-disguised adventure, moving through systems, and there will be not necessarily critical path like most kind of stealth type games. There'll be a couple of ways that are obfuscated through a room, for example, through vents, things like that. You're tangling and dancing with this alien that has essentially mood swings and tries to hunt you throughout. So it swings between fairly passive to ultra aggressive. You can hide in cupboards. Rookie error, by the way. Try really hard not to do that. Try and dance around with it out in the open. Again, I think the reason I got through it so quickly is because I ponied up and pushed, like I kind of made an effort to brave up. But remembering 10 years ago, geez, that was forever ago, being paralyzed by fear sitting in a cupboard and waiting for 15 minutes is probably how most people play this when they first get onto it. And I can't blame them, but it's one of those things. If you if you can overcome the hurdle and force yourself out there with the alien and move through, you'd be surprised what you can get away with. And it's truly heart-pounding when you're dodging around desks hoping it can't see you. So that's really cool. Something that I also thought about was there are two other sort of antagonistic components to the game and in enemy types, which would be the working Joes. The station that you're on is under a company called Seegson, which is sort of the bloody we have Weyland-Yutani at home version. They're the cheap knockoff B-grade station. And if you check all the email terminals, there is a whole through line that this station is kind of being decommissioned, and it's really interesting world building, again, without messing with the alien main line, talking about the explosive race into space and frontiersmanship and how this company, who was formerly Sieg and Son, really led the charge. They were up there. In fact, as best as I can understand, it's hard when you're reading logs and you're terrified you're going to get killed. But as far as I can understand, they actually were out in front of Weyland-Yutani in that expansionist space, but they went much more into sort of Freeport, trying to bring hub economy of terror into the space frontier, and it kind of blew up in their face because different needs. And there are articles running in tandem between sort of internal Seegson newsletter pumping it up, and also an investigative journalist that has been posted to the station, sort of, and you can see them contrasting, one being a puff piece and talking about the rich history of Seegson, and the other one talking about kind of the dilapidated nature of a station in decline because it kind of misjudged the future market. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, and it's really good narrative design, especially when we live in a time where everyone gets polarized on this, that, or this side or that side. And while this isn't necessarily political, it is taking two sides of the argument, and it's kind of giving you running parallel narratives that are colored as well. So at least there's self-awareness from the writers, and as you read it, you can sort of tell one's being more critical and hard and one's being more sort of positive and optimistic. It's really cool. It's a great way to do it without the devs fucking their game up and saying this is how you should think. It's like, here's how some people think from different perspectives, and make up your own mind. So it's quite fascinating. So you've got that running in parallel. But the reason I mention that is that their line of robots or synthetics are called Working Joes, and they're the sort of, you can tell from footage, and you would have seen it over the years, these bald, bloody, grayscale, bloody looking creepy dudes who have worked into larger Alien canon as well. All the other Alien games like Fireteam Elite and Dark Descent, what was that, last year? They had Working Joe type androids in it as well. So it's kind of cool that there's a legacy that was built from Alien Isolation that's kicked through. So you have to deal with them. And, you know, like, perhaps it's a risk of spoilers, but there are points where the robots are antagonistic. And they create a really interesting interplay. Like, in Isolation, funnily enough, as an enemy, they are a force to be reckoned with. If they do spot you, they're relentless Terminators that just walk at you, and fighting them is actually a real ordeal. You can't really fight the alien. There are a few exceptions, but not on hard, that's for sure. But generally speaking, the alien finds you, you're fucked. It's over, right? With the Working Joes, you can fight them, but it's like fighting Arnie from the Terminator. You can't front fight them. Like, if you try and punch them or swing at them, they'll just catch your arm, and they've got the best little quips like tut tut tut. You're acting hysterical. In fact, they have the best lines just walking around. They're like, Working Joes, Seegson, always someone behind you, helping you. And it's like, oh my God, they know exactly what they're doing with these lines. But yeah, fighting them, especially on hard, it actually gets a bit ridiculous with some of the models later in the game where they just eat shotgun shell after shotgun shell to the face. And I won't say much more than that about weapons and gadgets and all that sort of stuff. So you can fight them, but you really don't want to. But the real magic with them is the alien doesn't give a shit about the working Joes. And if you do find yourself in a pickle where you're fighting both of them, it is really, really tricky, because the way that you deal with the alien can be often quite different to how you deal with a working Joe. So once a working Joe's onto you, you fight it or you fucking run and hide, because that's it. Like, it's not going to stop. And the problem is, if you've got a working Joe on your case and there's an alien cruising around, if you sprint, that alien's going to come running as well. So my point is that there is a synergy, this antagonistic enemy design synergy. These are terms I've never really used before, and it's absolutely wild if you think about it. These different elements that on their own are great gameplay loops, but when you layer them, they create these cross sections of now you have to deal with the problem to a third degree, a third consideration. And then the third element are just other humans trying to survive on the station as well. Sometimes you'll bump into people that are just scared, and you even get little voice lines, little sort of almost Easter eggs of Ripley saying, "Hey, get the fuck out of here, the monster's here," and they'll be like, "Right, you heard the lady, let's go, boys." But sometimes you'll come up against armed dudes, and they're not always shoot on sight, because they're just trying to survive as well. They're all not just malicious evil dudes. They'll warn you off, they'll wave you off, and getting shot by them is no joke. Yep, they'll kill you, but it creates this other problem where you're trying to be quiet, and these dudes get trigger happy, and as soon as they start pulling the trigger, the alien will rock up immediately to try and figure out what's going on and go ballistic. And so it's one of those things, there's another layer of antagonistic enemy design, and so it's not just different coloured monsters that throw slightly higher level fireballs, which is enemy design bloody nowadays. So you have these characters and you're kind of sympathetic, but you really don't want to antagonize them. And one of the biggest fears is like, it's not don't shoot at me, it's more don't shoot, you're gonna make this so much worse. And occasionally there'll be times where like maybe you'll want to throw a noisemaker or something like that out to bring the alien in. I did actually do that at one point. This dude was like, "Come out, I'm gonna kill you," and I threw the noisemaker out, and then you can hear him just sobbing and begging for his, oh my god, and he's praying and everything like that while the alien cruised around for him. I felt really bad, but I had to get rid of him. He was in the way and he kept trying to kill me.
Someone. Oh, Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be. No, please.
So yeah, those three enemy types, and that's all it really is, but that's all it needs to be, because it is just so well considered. Anyway, I'm raving about that because it was one of those things, as I played, I came to realize it was quite wonderful how they all intricately layered over each other, how you deal with all three differently, and how they can create this sort of bloody tornado of trouble if you don't handle it properly. The narrative's good, the characters are good, the writing, it's all very, very good and proper. It very much follows the same methodology that you see in Dead Space, like a space engineer going around fixing things. Again, I wouldn't necessarily say it's bloated, because every second of this 12 hours, I was enthralled and having a great time. But it is one of those things, it's like, Jesus Christ, how many problems do I have to fix just to get off this space station, right? Problem after problem after problem. It becomes a little bit of suspension of disbelief. To give a kind of facetious parallel to help illustrate it, it'd be like having a Mario game, but it's 12 hours of the princess getting moved to yet another bloody castle, And at the 15th time, you find yourself going, well, come on, boys, this is a bit much. So the game does sort of move the goalposts, and there are moments where you will just out loud sigh where you get to the end of this huge sprawling corridor to get a key card, and then you have to take it all the way back. So sometimes that hurts the game, but broadly speaking, it's not enough to change its elite status. Anyway, look, I thought I'd take my time and waffle a little bit more. Again, I'm a big Alien fan, and I really, really enjoyed this. So the takeaway is, check it out. If you don't like super scary games, give it a go anyway, though it is still quite terrifying. It's a different kind of terrifying. It is suspense, it's cat and mouse, but it's less about worrying that the game's going to show you something gross or awful. Again, I use Outlast as an example. I don't particularly like that kind of horror. But yeah, give it a go. If you're an Aliens fan, absolutely, it's a must play. Still, playing it today in current year, it still holds up with the best of them, better than half the bloody games that we've looked at this year. I don't say that lightly. Also, like I said, most importantly, if you played it back then and you have fond memories, or even you have slightly tainted memories about the ending or the runtime or whatever, boot it up, play it on hard. You won't regret it. It holds up so well. Anyway, anything beyond that will be waffling. This is a bit of an exhaustive review, but what a wonderful game. Maybe I'll play the DLCs. I've never played them at all, but apparently there's some really good ones. Something apparently a bit more like Prey Moon Crash, almost like a bit more of a longer form game mode. And also some stuff where you can play through scenes from the original movie with the original cast. That's kind of groovy. So yeah, maybe stand by, I'll have a look at them. But let me know what you reckon. Let me know if you have any thoughts on nostalgia or you pick it up or anything like that. And that might be something we start doing with the channel. I just really enjoyed playing games like a normal person for a change, and I kind of want to bottle that lightning. So next review will probably be something new, but then maybe we alternate back and forth and I cover some more 2014 titles. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.